Welcome back again to the Making the Madness YouTube channel. Sean here to discuss the UNLV Running Rebels making three big-time moves over the past week, and they're all big-time players on the defensive end of the floor. We're talking about Elijah Harkless and Elijah Parquet from Colorado for Parquet and Oklahoma for Harkless. Both are two of the best perimeter defenders in college basketball. Both were great all defensive team players in their respective conferences. And then the last one today is Luis Rodriguez coming over from Ole Miss, 6'6", multi-positional defender, can defend just about any position on the floor. He's a big-time athlete. He doesn't do a ton on the offensive end of the floor, similar to Parquet in that aspect. But they will be dominant on the defensive end of the floor. And then when you pair that with Harkless, who's a little bit of a better offensive player than the other two, he's still not a great offensive player, low 40s shooting percentage, around 32% from outside during his career. So he's not a great offensive player either. When you put those three together, you can probably match that up with any team in the country and say, hey, these are the three best defenders on one team in college basketball. And I think you could have a real argument for that because they were three great defenders at the power conference level in three different conferences, the SEC, the Big 12, and the Pac 12. Put them together, and they're a great defensive unit. How do they play together? How do they communicate together? I think that's something you have to see because that's always something important with teams. How do they communicate on the defensive end? But on the surface, on paper, I think this team will be very good because they have very good individual defenders, and I think that will go a long way. And then when you look at it, you have two really solid defensive big men too. David Mwaka, a really good athlete who can block some shots, who came over from Lamar a couple of years ago, and Victor Iwako, who came over from Oklahoma last year, former teammate of Elijah Harkless. And that's two former Oklahoma players who were coached by Lon Kruger, the dad of current UNLV head coach Kevin Kruger. So you have those guys to shore up your front court there. They're going to defend at the 5. Then you have Luis Rodriguez, who's probably going to play the 4 in reality here. And then you're going to have Donovan Williams, who could still return test in the NBA draft waters. He's the best pure scorer on the team, and I'm not sure it's particularly close. He can be a 15, 16 point per game guy with Bryce Hamilton out of the picture. But that's going to be a big loss. You have to find a way to replace his scoring because he was the only consistent scorer on the team. Williams was there, but he got hurt, and then he just wasn't the same after. It took him a while to get back to what he was. But he's another big-time athlete that can shoot the basketball, and he's also a very solid defender. So you could play him at the 3, but you don't have enough starting spots for all of these defenders, so you're probably looking at Parquet or Harkless coming off the bench. I would assume it's Parquet. Then at the 1, I haven't seen an official announcement if Jordan McCabe is coming back for the extra year of eligibility yet, but if he does, he will be your starting point guard. He was very solid last year coming over from West Virginia. He's just a solid showrunner. He's not an elite scorer, but he can score the basketball a little bit, 6.5 points per game, 5 assists, low turnover rate. He's a very solid point guard. But the one guy that I'm looking at as an X factor is Jackie Johnson, the transfer from Duquesne. Jackie Johnson the third. He's 5'11", he's a smaller guard, but he can absolutely light it up from outside. Shot 37% from deep and has some deep range. He's just such a skilled scorer, and he's still super young, so he has a lot of potential to grow. He had 30 points against George Washington earlier this year. That was his career high, 27 against UMass. So he has some big-time games this season. That's really what he can do. When it comes down to it, he might lead the team in scoring. It'll probably be either him or Donovan Williams. But I want to see... I think UNLV, no matter what happens, will have a top 20 defense in Ken Palm's defensive efficiency by the end of the year based on all the players they have that can really defend. But how do they play on the offensive end? Because you're not replacing Bryce Hamilton. There is no Bryce Hamilton replacement, and it seems like UNLV really put an emphasis on becoming an elite defensive unit. And I think that's what we're seeing here with these additions because they all happen to be elite defenders. So that's really what we're seeing here with UNLV. But what can they get on the offensive end? Will Harkless be good enough on the offensive end to make up for some of the lack of offensive production from some of the other guys on the team? That's something I'm curious to see because he's a double-digit scorer in the Big 12 but didn't come efficiently. But who can take a step up on the offensive end? Can Jackie Johnson go from 9.5 points to 13, 14 points per game? I would say the A10 and Mountain West are pretty similar conferences based on where they're ranked every year, so it's pretty much a lateral move. I'd say UNLV is a much better team and a better program, but it's pretty much a lateral move based on conference, so it's not like he's going up in the conference. He's pretty much in the same kind of league. So you have Jackie Johnson, you have Donovan Williams. Who's going to be the third scoring option? Is that Elijah Harkless? Is it a guy like Josh Baker, who was a pretty solid JUCO recruit coming out but didn't play well this year, didn't shoot the ball well, but sometimes it takes JUCO guys a year or so to get acclimated, and Josh Baker didn't have a huge role, but I think he is really talented, and I liked what I saw from him during his days at Hutchinson Community College. I think he could be in for a big season due to his shooting ability, so maybe it's a guy like him that steps up. But where does UNLV find the scoring outside of their top two with Johnson and with Donovan Williams? But I'm also curious to see the starting lineup because there's some depth. Having depth is never a bad thing, but who ends up starting? If McCabe is back, he's starting at the one, you'd have to assume. So that means that Parquet likely comes off the bench. He's a two guard anyways. Jackie Johnson likely comes off the bench. So that's your top seven. Justin Webster coming off the bench too. He's a solid player. Keyshawn Gilbert as a sophomore coming off the bench. So you're looking at a solid eight or nine man rotation probably, and I think that's really solid. But I think UNLV has the talent to make an NCAA tournament run just based on how good they are on the defensive end of the floor. And I'm kind of talking myself into it of them being a potential tournament team and out of it at the same time. But I'm leaning more towards they could be a bubble team and they'll be a top four team in the Mountain West Conference. Because you look at what San Diego State did last year. They were outside the top 200 in Ken Pomp's offensive efficiency. And nobody outside of Matt Bradley could put the ball in the basket consistently. He was the only reliable scorer on the roster. And they were one of the best defensive teams in college basketball. Will UNLV be something similar? I could see it. I mean, same deal with Boise State. They weren't very good offensively, but they were elite defensively. What did they do? They made the NCAA tournament. They lost in the first round, similar to San Diego State, but they made the NCAA tournament nonetheless. And for UNLV, if they're able to get into the tournament, or even they didn't make the NIT this year, they were pretty close. They were probably a few stolen bids away from being in the NIT. They're 18-14. Not bad, all things considered. But they really haven't had a lot of successful seasons recently. I mean, they've had one 20-win season in the last 4, 5, 6 years. So if they could get another 20-win year, which I think is very possible considering they won 18 last year, they're not going to have Bryce Hamilton, but I think overall they're a better team. I think this could be a team that is a top 4 team in the Mountain West, and how I would rank it right now in a very deep Mountain West, I feel like. Nevada's taken a huge step back, but overall I would go Colorado State if David Roddy is back, they're number 1. If not, they're probably number 3. Number 1, if Roddy's gone, is San Diego State for me. Then Wyoming, if Roddy's gone. Then Colorado State, and UNLV kind of battling for 3-4. I think those two would be very close. I would probably lean Colorado State, but I think all 4. I think we could see a 4-bid Mountain West again. I think it comes with these 4 teams. Boise State may be in the mix too if Marcus Shaver decides to come back for the extra year of eligibility. But Abu Kijab is gone. Mladen Armouche is gone. Emmanuel Akot entered the transfer portal. So they're losing a lot of pieces from last year's team. So I think they're outside that range, but they'd probably be the next team up. Maybe Utah State, adding Taylor Funk from St. Joe's. But I would put the top 4 pretty set in stone as UNLV, Wyoming, Colorado State, and San Diego State. But the UNLV Running Rebels are certainly very improved, and I've been so impressed by what Kevin Kruger has done in a short time in Vegas. I think he'll continue doing a great job, and maybe he'll be a guy that leads them to several NCAA tournament bids and continues to attack the transfer portal and add some big-time players like they have in recent years. That's really what he's succeeded at in his 2 years with the Running Rebels. So that's my thoughts on the UNLV transfer recruiting class thus far. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. We're over 500 subscribers. And until next time, have a good one.